Hey, my name is Mohan, I'm the CEO of Nairon.
My name is Luca and I'm the CEO of Nairon.
Luca, in the last video, we talked about harnesses. In this video, we're going to cover orchestrators. Now, I know these two concepts are things that people confuse together all the time. So let's make that distinction and let's cover the topic.
So similarly how we covered in the previous video, where harnesses are essentially the body for the LLM to perform actions, the orchestrator is the brain. So the brain is responsible for looking at a specific task and deciding how to achieve that task. You could call it like a to-do list planner or something like that. Today, orchestrators are a lot more complicated and they're able to do a lot more things. One very important thing when thinking about orchestrators and looking at orchestrators is that at different levels of the orchestration, you can have multiple models. What does this look like in practice? If you come in through Claude Code and you present a pretty complex question, like, how does our billing system work? Essentially, what's gonna happen is that you're gonna use most likely the most expensive model to go out and research, to actually get an idea of what's going on, do all the stuff that we spoke about in the previous video through the harness, like grepping, to figure out on a high level what it's actually doing. Perhaps even coming to an implementation plan on how to actually improve or fix this bug that you're reporting. Once that heavy work is done, and that is done through an orchestrator, because it's kind of like reasoning, okay, I first need to do some research, then I need to go and come up with a plan. Then the orchestrator might actually say, okay, we can now spin off a different model, a cheaper model and a smaller model to actually do that implementation. And so I have a couple of examples here. The first one is looking at what typically people think a model does, whereas it gives a question, gives you an answer. But actually what's really happening behind the hood is that the orchestrator is piecing the request. The orchestrator is using tools to go and identify and getting more information. Then it's maybe putting that through the actual model itself to kind of understand what it should do, and then giving you the final answer.
Let's speak more about what you meant when you said multiple models working in tandem. What does that actually look like?
This is a really good example of what most orchestrators are built like today. For example, if I'm using Opus 4.8 to reason and to do all the higher leverage stuff, like actually understanding what the problem is about, finalizing the plan and all of that, even interrogating the user and getting more clarifying questions in, the orchestrator will essentially say, okay, this is a simple task. I can essentially give it to a smaller model who can go and implement this. Because remember how we spoke about it in the previous videos, where you're always getting charged by the number of tokens being used. When you're actually doing the work in itself, you're actually going through a lot more tokens than if you're just doing an overview task or you're just doing a research task. Just think about it. If I tell you to edit a book, or if I ask you what is this book about, you're gonna go a lot more in depth on the actual work on editing. And so it makes sense to give that to a smaller model that understands the objective, like switch out this mechanism for another mechanism, than, for example, a very big model would, doing the same task. And so the orchestrator, as I mentioned, will use 4.8, but then go over to Sonnet or go over to Haiku to do the smaller changes. What's very interesting about that is that actually the same workflows are happening, but just in loops. So a standard one workflow could have, let's say, 5 steps like this, where, for example, if we were giving an orchestrator the task of writing a personalized outbound email, what it would do is it would reason with itself and say, okay, I need to split this up into 5 different little tasks. The 5 tasks are to look up the prospect, to look up the company, then to look up past conversations, actually perform the task of drafting out the email, and then finally to send it out. That stuff is essentially what the orchestrator would set up. But the orchestrator could do that and pass that over, that plan, to a smaller model to actually execute that. Much better output, much quicker output, a lot less tokens. So the example that I gave is quite simple and it's quite streamlined, it's quite linear as well. Many times the orchestrator needs to go back and forth with different models on whatever the outputs are. So for example, it might give a certain plan, do step 1 through 5, but at step 3 something goes wrong, or there's some additional information that needs to essentially change the workflow or change the orchestration in this sense. And so the orchestrator is always balancing between planning, doing, and then reshuffling that to change that plan. That's why it's actually really interesting, because with Claude Code and with other orchestrators like that, you can essentially, in the middle of its run or in the middle of its work, interject and add further requirements or further instructions or clarifying instructions, because what's happening is as the model is running in between turns, it's able to reason again. And your injection of your prompt actually gets put into the entire system to essentially dictate where the orchestrator should lead these agents to work.
Okay, and of course, a big component that makes all of this possible is memory. So in the next video, we'll go in depth on that. For the time being, guys, you can subscribe to our newsletter. Links down in the description below. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, where we're very active on a day-to-day basis. And until next time, we'll see you in the next video.